beverage and make yourself comfortable. We'll get started. Liz, can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth and final spring session in our Woodland Conference mini-series of 2021. My name is Don Cameron, and I'm a regional forester with the Department of Lands and Forestry in Truro. It's my pleasure to be your MC. In the spirit of meaningful reconciliation, we acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people in what is now today Nova Scotia. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1725 and subsequent treaties remain foundational to the relationship between the Mi'kmaq people and all Canadians. Remember, we are all treaty people. This conference mini-series is a variation of our annual Spring Woodland Conference series, which we have been organizing across the province annually for many years, well over 15 years. Despite the pandemic, we're pleased to be able to offer interesting and educational presentations this year in a new online format. Hopefully it will be safe to meet again in person for next year's spring conferences. In the meantime, we hope you are staying safe and healthy during these challenging COVID times. A little bit about the WebEx platform that we're working with tonight. You as participants are automatically muted and your video is turned off for the benefit of the presentations. Your names are invisible to each of you, but visible to us, the event organizers. There will be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. There's a Q&A panel on the upper right side of your screen where you can post your questions by clicking on to all panelists. You will be able to forward questions for one presenter or both, one at a time, and then after the next speaker presents. I will read the questions out to the presenter and they will answer verbally. We may not get to all questions during the time allotted. It depends on our time and the number of questions, but our goal is to send out answers after the session today to any questions that are not answered this evening. The polling questions for you will appear on the right of the screen below the Q&A section. Please note that in case you would like to go back and review some part of this event tonight, or if you know of someone interested who is unable to be with us today, this is being recorded this evening. This whole session will be recorded and will be posted online for future viewing. The previous webinar sessions that were recorded were entitled Forest Sector and Forestry Transition Team Update, Private Land Stewardship, Invasive Species and Forest Pests, Climate Change and Forest Carbon, and most recently, 2 weeks ago, Biodiversity, Wildlife, and Species at Risk. The link for these recorded sessions is available at the nswoods.ca website. That's nswoods.ca website. I should add that thus far, there have been approximately 300 viewings of these recorded sessions, which is pretty impressive and encouraging. Chainsaw draws, which I know you're interested in. On Friday, April 30th, you will have a chance to win one of 2 grand draw prizes, which we are well known for, and that is chainsaws. We will have 2 lucky draws for 2 Steel MS362 chainsaws purchased from the Tractor Dome in Milford and S.J. McRae & Son in Badcock, Cape Breton. Now, as a bonus, you'll have the chance to view the drawing of these 2 chainsaws. Yes, the draws will be held at the Tractor Dome in Milford at 2 p.m. and we will be providing live online coverage via the same platform. So all you have to do is go to the link, which again is on the nswoods.ca website. You as participants of these sessions will receive 1 ballot in your name for each of the sessions you have attended. Note, today's speaker bios and any speaker handouts will be available also through the nswoods.ca website. The format of this evening, our presenters will respond to questions after completing each of their presentations. And as far as the duration, it's our goal to have the event end approximately 8 p.m. We're happy to be able to offer this special COVID version of the Woodland Conference series. For those of you who are regulars at our annual conferences, you may recall that we create agendas for each conference based on feedback we receive from you, the participants. So that's my first plug for you to provide feedback at the end of today's session, because as I said, there will be more in the future. Okay, as far as the Q&As, we'll try to get to answer as many of the questions as we're able to within our planned time frame. If time does become limiting, we may have to prioritize the questions based on those that are connected specifically to today's presentations. Note, it is our intention to provide answers to all the questions posed today. As I mentioned before, if we run out of time to answer them here, we will provide answers in the coming days by responding directly to those that ask the questions. The feedback received thus far indicates that today's presentation topics are of interest to many people that own woodland and are involved with some aspects of forestry from a business perspective. Our first presenter is Rod Babcock, the Executive Director of NS Innovation Hub. Rod will let us know how the Innovation Hub is fostering growth of the low-carbon bioeconomy. Rod, the mic is all yours. Take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Don. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good start. All right, then I should be able to do this and share my screen. And then, all right, did that work okay? Can everybody, Don, can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. Well, listen, first of all, thank you so much, Don, Liz, Christy, for this opportunity to speak. We greatly appreciate it. And, the fact that you've done 6 of these and covering a very wide range of interesting and important topic areas, I think is fantastic. So well done. Very pleased to be here this evening. I'm probably going to be underwhelming relative to the other topics that, you've covered. But I'll try to be somewhat interesting anyway. So a little background, the Nova Scotia Innovation Hub is a not-for-profit association that, as our mission says right on this slide, supports the advance of Nova Scotia's low-carbon, what we call our biocircular economy, or often our bioeconomy. And what I want to chat about this evening is our work and narrowing it down to our work on forest bioeconomy opportunities. And so maybe, Christy, if we could just start off with that poll that addresses people's familiarity with, oh, there it is, it popped up great, on the bioeconomy. So if you would complete that poll, I'd be really interested to know, how many people have heard of the bioeconomy. And I'll address that here shortly. So a little bit about the Nova Scotia Innovation Hub and our history. We were formed back in, 2015. And we started off with a number of founding shareholders, which included a Nova Corp, a COA, Nova Scotia Power, Emera, and at the time, the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources. And one of the first things that we learned is that, in order to get traction for our idea of the bioeconomy, we need to expand our tent. And so over time, we've added a range of stakeholders, which include folks like Northern Pulp and FP Innovations, and includes the Assurance Center, which if you're not familiar with them, are an R&D institute located in Cape Breton. We've got Port Hawkesbury Paper, Sustain Technologies, Dalhousie University, the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture joined, and Michelin. And what all of these, organizations have is, although they're very disparate and have different, functions and models, to say the least, there's a common kind of connecting thread of their interest in supporting the bioeconomy. And so if we think about what is the bioeconomy, and I always say that when we originally launched the Nova Scotia Innovation Hub, we spent a lot of time thinking about what the bioeconomy was and what we're trying to achieve. And these poll results are, I see them now, speak to this challenge, is that, there's only 4% of people say they're very familiar, 23% of people say they're somewhat familiar, and then there's a huge chunk of them that have never heard of the bioeconomy. And so this is something we've been working to overcome. And so when we thought about the bioeconomy and thought about what are we trying to achieve in Nova Scotia, we said, really, our vision of success is biorefineries. We want to, foster the growth of businesses and technologies that process biological materials, things like wood chips or agricultural crops, or even waste, and use those inputs to produce valuable products such as, low carbon fuels, renewable electricity, or commercially useful green chemicals. And what this slide is aimed to show is that there are a number of these types of biorefineries, if you take a broad view of it, that are across Canada and Nova Scotia today. And so working from left to right, Ernst, who you may be familiar with, they're a leader in the Canadian bioeconomy. They produce a low carbon renewable fuel as well as a biocarbon product from sawmill residuals. And their flagship plant is located in Port Cartier, Quebec, where they co-locate it with an Arbex sawmill there and actually take sawmill residuals from that mill and use it in their process as the main feedstock. Then you've got companies like Celluforce. They're a company that produces nanocrystalline cellulose or cellulose nanocrystals from wood fiber. And that product is a high value additive that has all kinds of interesting applications in things like reinforcing plastics and improving durability of paints and a number of other areas where it's very interesting. It's a high value specialty chemical. And then when you get closer to home, some of you may be familiar with Sustain Technologies, located at the Kaiser Meadows landfill in just north of Chester. And this is a facility that takes in municipal solid waste and through a very advanced recycling process, breaks it down into its constituent streams. And what it currently produces from that recycled product are, a number of things that can be recycled, like, steel. But as well, it takes the biomass component. So the cardboard, the wood, the paper that is in that municipal solid waste stream, it produces a biomass pellet. And they also, through a very unique technology, take plastic and break that down and turn it into a fuel product as well, a synthetic diesel type product. And then, closer to the heart of downtown, you've got a company like Overland AgriScience, who actually take organic wastes and feed them to soldier flies, and those soldier flies feed on that organic waste and produce larvae that are very rich in protein. And so they're able to sell that larvae into food applications for things like pet food, but also are looking at selling it into opportunities like aquaculture feeds. And so that kind of gives you the complete spectrum of, when we think about bioeconomy, it's a very, very wide ranging area, everything from facilities that consume, wood fiber to all kinds of organic inputs, including waste. I wanted to share this slide to give you a sense of, well, what is this? What do the bioeconomy businesses kind of look like in Nova Scotia? And you can see the stars on the slide, and think of each star as representing a separate bioeconomy business. And what this slide does, it gives you a sense of, where are they at in terms of what types of products they produce? So are they renewable energy or advanced, chemicals like a carbon material, or are they in the food or in biochemicals? And then, as well, what stage are they at? And when we think about what stage they're at, we think about it in terms of, are they at a very early stage where they just have an idea, or they're seeking what we would refer to as angel funding, so early stage funding to help launch that idea. That's on kind of the bottom of the slide, making its way up to the top where they're in the process of raising significant amounts of money to finance the project. Part of the challenge with the bioeconomy is that many of these businesses are pre-commercial, right? So they're not actually commercialized yet. They're on a pathway to commercialize their business, commercialize their technology. Many of them are doing things that have never done before, and so have a very challenging path to become completely commercial. And so this chart is meant to give you just a view of, well, where are those businesses in terms of their stage of development, and what's the product focus? You get a sense that when you're at the top of the chart, well, that's commercialized or just close to being a commercially viable business. But you can see that most of the businesses in the Innovation Hubs pipeline that we work with are on the lower end of that chart. Why are we doing all of this is a very good question. And what this slide tries to show is the impact of that we see from the bioeconomy. And this is a graphic that depicts the potential impact if the bioeconomy businesses that we're working with are successful in commercializing their technology and business and building out commercial plants here in Nova Scotia. And you can see the typical metrics that you would monitor in terms of economic development, things like investment and annual revenues and exports, all very high numbers. But there's a few here that are kind of near and dear to our hearts at the Innovation Hub. The first is, if you look on the bottom kind of right-hand corner here, renewable feedstock consumption of 866,000 dry tons per year. And while that's not all forest fiber, a very good sizable chunk of it is forest fiber. The forest sector is very important to the bioeconomy as the largest source of feedstock in the province. The other thing that's important to us is, greenhouse gas impacts. And so almost all of these businesses probably got a sense of that from when I described a few examples earlier. They're producing a product that is a substitute for something that's derived from petroleum. And so in that respect, they have a very favorable greenhouse gas impact. And so when we look at that impact, these businesses would have a favorable impact on carbon emissions of the tune of about 6.7 million tons per year. And to put that in perspective, Nova Scotia's footprint is about 14 to 15 million tons of carbon emissions per year. So 6.7 million reduction is pretty significant. And then the third piece that's really important to us, I used to work at Bowater Mersey. I lived in Bridgewater. I lived in Midville Branch for the locals down in that area. Wasn't officially in Bridgewater. And so rural Nova Scotia is very important to us. And so the bulk of this investment, over 70%, would actually occur in rural Nova Scotia, contributing to the well-being of rural parts of this province, which I think many people on the line here are probably from rural Nova Scotia, and you could probably agree with me when you say if you're standing in downtown Halifax, it's not obvious that rural parts of our province are challenged and could use some help, and so that's very important to us. So what do we do at the Innovation Hub, and how do we try and make all of this happen? Well, oh, thanks, Christy. You put up my poll question again. I missed that. I appreciate you doing that. So what I wanted to ask was how do you think the businesses that we've described, what's most important to them in terms of thinking about building a project in Nova Scotia? And there's a number of options there, everything from access to R&D to feedstock supply to good sites to locate a plant, to access to investment, to ability to market the products here. So I'll provide some commentary on that once we've seen the answers. So how do we help these businesses? Well, we do a few things. One is we advocate for them. So we do a lot of this, try to educate people on what the bioeconomy is, the types of businesses, and the types of opportunities that exist. A lot of our work in our early days was looking at key things about Nova Scotia that make it attractive for bioeconomy businesses. So we've done a very substantial analysis on the availability and cost of feedstock from a range of sectors. We've done a bunch of work looking at what are potential location sites for bioeconomy businesses. They're ideally co-located with existing businesses who have infrastructure they can share. We looked at market opportunities here for them in the province, and so it's always nice if you're going to set up a business to have a domestic customer, and a range of other elements. So we've got a lot of key business data that bioeconomy businesses find valuable as they're thinking about building their projects here. The other thing we do, and this may sound strange, it was something that I learned when we started doing this work, is Nova Scotia is a small province, and somebody said to us, we need to be really good at being really small. And one of the ways we can be really good at being really small is having really good connectivity. And so it's really helpful in this province that, it's really easy to be connected. And so if I'm working with a bioeconomy business and, they're looking to, work with a partner who can provide them a location and some feedstock, then I can pick up the phone and phone Georg Ernst, who's going to talk next, and say, hey, George, let's talk about this. Do you think there are opportunities to, provide these guys with some feedstock or maybe locate them at, a local sawmill? And it's easy to have that conversation. And that's really valuable. That's not as easy to do in other places. And time again, we have our clients tell us about that. The other piece that we do is we have small pots of money that we use to help these businesses achieve key milestones on their path to establishing a business in Nova Scotia. And so that can be things like if they need a detailed feedstock study to attract investment, or they need to understand market opportunities overseas, we can, provide some funding to cost share with them to bring in expertise to help them with that. I see my poll results are up, and I see there's a wide range of answers for what we think these bioeconomy businesses need most. And I'm really pleased to see that the most popular answer is secure feedstock. And I'll start by saying that the real answer is all of those things are important. It is never a bad thing to have all of the pieces we talked about, from R&D to feedstock to co-location partners to to money to local markets. But the first question that we always get asked is, what's the availability and cost of feedstock, and who do we need to talk to about that? And again, back to the forest sector. Forest sector is the largest source of potential feedstock we see for the bioeconomy in Nova Scotia, and so that's a really important piece. Some people ask me, what we see as emerging technologies in the bioeconomy and kind of what their status is. And this slide is meant to depict this. I generally plotted them. It might be a little bit coarse, but plotted them on this graph of where they are from what we call a technical readiness level on the bottom axis, and then on the y-axis, a commercial readiness level. So all of them have, a challenge to commercialize, and it generally falls along these two dimensions. Technically, is their technology ready to go? Can it produce commercially? But also commercially, have they built the business and built the market that they need to in order to make their business successful? And if you look at the range of technologies on this chart and where they're trying to get to, the top right-hand corner is success, And so we see things like, oh, I'm sorry, I changed my slide because I'm trying to read it. Biofuels, as being, commercialized or pre-commercial. Renewable natural gas from anaerobic digestion is a commercialized technology, present in some parts of Canada, but widespread in Europe. We see things like biochar, that is very close. There are, some emerging biochar markets and some good technologies to produce biochar. And then, on the other end, there are things like, renewable natural gas from wood fiber. The technologies, while that's interesting, the technologies to produce it are more or less in their infancy. And, commercially, there's still a lot of work to be done there. And, it carries on the whole spectrum. So I'm just about done. Why am I excited about, Nova Scotia and the forest bioeconomy? And I wanted to give you a few examples. I should first say that, there's a lot of activity in terms of looking at businesses and projects in Nova Scotia's forest bioeconomy. It's not always well reported. It's not obvious. To an extent, they tend to be somewhat secretive, so they don't like to be in the public domain too much, but there's a lot of activity. I wanted to just point to 3 projects that have hit in the public domain that I think are interesting. The first is Elmsdale Lumber and RDA Atlantic. are looking at doing a biochar project at Elmsdale's sawmill in Elmsdale. And that's an interesting opportunity to produce biochar from wood chips and then market that as a soil amendment. Biochar's got really interesting properties in terms of improving soil health. There's another business, Mass Wheelman. It's a Mi'kmaq based business, and they're based out of Member 2. Business is based out of Member 2. Currently, they're doing a lot of work at Cape Breton University, and they're commercializing a traditional Mi'kmaq technology using birch bark oil in natural health applications. It's very good as an ointment to treat skin conditions. Early stage business, they're at a pilot scale. They probably have to scale up by an order of magnitude of 10 or so in order to truly be successful, but a lot of really good work going on at Cape Breton University to do that. And then the one on the far right of the screen, you might have seen this recently. There's been a lot of work at the Brashearn Center in Cape Breton, where they've built a cadre, if you will, of bio-based businesses there. And one of them that's really interesting is a company called Alta Biota, and they take carbonized wood fiber and put that through a process to produce a graphene product. And if you're not familiar with graphene, it's a super high value, but to this point, niche market opportunity, but very, very interesting. And they've shown a lot of really good results in terms of improving the performance and strength properties of cement and concrete. So, a few really good, interesting examples right here in Nova Scotia. So with that, I'm going to pause and say thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope that was somewhat interesting and informative, and I'm happy to take questions.
You're muted, Don.
Okay, folks, if you want to hit your Q&A with all participants, you can put your questions in to Rod, please. Rod, that's interesting. You said that they tend to be quite secretive, the local folks. They all have their own methodologies and things that they're working on that they don't want to share, I suppose, until they get it to a certain stage.
Yeah, Don, that's a pretty good description. To an extent, it's they're secretive about their process, but to an extent as well, they recognize they're at an early stage and they don't want to create a whole lot of hype until they've fully advanced or further advanced their technology. And the other piece is you got to remember these are kind of early stage startups. Just resources to be communicating to the public is sometimes not all that available to them.
Right. Somebody's asked if you could provide your slide deck so this could be shared for anyone who was interested.
I'd be happy to do that. Whatever is the best way to do that, I can send a PDF here after the meeting if that helps.
Excellent. I guess, like you said earlier, it's all about trying to promote this and get the word out, which is what it's all about. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, another one.
Don, there's one there around I can see. Can you clarify what feedstock is? And
exactly.
Yeah, I apologize for using that jargon. That's a really important and kind of generic term, but feedstock just refers to the raw material that a bioeconomy business would use to convert into a higher value product. And so when you look at Ensign, who I described earlier, who have a project in Quebec, they're using wood chips and bark from the Arbeck sawmill. Those wood chips and bark are generally called their feedstock.
We've got a question here. Would pellet plants fall in your lap or other ways to utilize low value wood?
Well, listen, pellet plants are a great idea. I'm not overly familiar with them, so I'm going to refrain from going much further than that. But to the question of do they fall into our domain, the answer is really no. We're focused on things that are particularly innovative and emerging. And that's not to say pellet businesses can't be good. They can be great. Obviously, we've got a few of them here in Nova Scotia, but there are others who, who work on pellet plants. That's outside of our scope.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, here's an interesting question. Do you generally find these startups, or do they find you, the chicken and the egg?
It's a mix of both. And in fairness, I have to say this, that we work closely with a Nova Corp, Nova Scotia Business Inc., and ACOA. And they are, and I should say, Don, pardon me, I should mention Nova Scotia Lands and Forestry as well. And that group of departments, because they have economic development mandates, are tremendous partners, and they see a lot of opportunities. So a lot of times what has happened is, as they see a forest bioeconomy or a bioeconomy opportunity come through their shop, they'll send that over to us, and we'll work on it. We do get some pull as well, because we talk a lot about Nova Scotia outside of Nova Scotia and the benefits of being in Nova Scotia, and that creates some traction from outside companies as well. And then there's a range of companies within the province that are already in the bioeconomy that are looking to expand, and we tap into those as well and try and help them.
Here's something that's been expanding just in the last year. Where does district heating fit into the program, as it is a known technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I would say that district heating is, I think, a really interesting opportunity, but a little outside of our scope. We have done some have done some analysis on the use of wood fiber for heating, and that's a really interesting technology. And I think a lot of people assume that it couldn't compete with existing energy sources. And boy, I got to tell you, our lesson on that is that that's just not true. There's really good opportunities in wood heat. And so I think it's really interesting to pursue, but it's a little bit outside of our scope.
Okay, along that same line, somebody's asking for this, and so others are thinking the same thing, obviously. A few more words on the biochar product as far as what it is and what it does.
Yeah, biochar. Okay, so well, the raw material, the feedstock that is often wood fiber of some kind. And for the project at Elmsdale, they're going to use wood chips and bark from Elmsdale, and they put it through a process where what's the right way to describe it? They cook it, they roast it would be a good way to describe it in that particular technology. And there's some off gas that's produced from that they can be used to run the process, but the output is really carbonized wood fiber. So it looks something like charcoal, and so only much smaller. And so what it's used for is, there's a range of potential applications. The emerging markets are primarily around use as a amendment to soil. And a soil amendment, you can think of, it's not a fertilizer. The way that biochar has been described to me, in terms of how it works, is it improves the plant's ability to use the inputs that are in the soil. And so it can take better advantage of the mineral inputs, but also water. And so there's been a lot of interest and a lot of really good science around how the use of biochar has a lasting effect on a soil's productivity. It's not only used for that, though. It's used for a few other things, or can be used for a few other things. People have looked at using it in filtration applications, so water filtration to clean up water. They've also looked at using it for really advanced applications, things like carbon black, which is a component used in rubber manufacturing. And if you think about our rubber manufacturing industry in Nova Scotia, you could probably think about how that would be interesting. So it's got quite a spectrum. Some of the more advanced applications, in terms of the higher value stuff, are still being developed and commercialized, but a lot of the focus right now is on using it as a soil amendment. I should say one more thing on that, Don, before I close is
Mhm.
people have also looked at using it as an additive for livestock feeds. Apparently, it has really good impact on livestock's ability to process the feed that they're given.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question here, right, even though we're running into overtime, because
Yeah.
a lot of people on the line would want to know about this. What's the current forest fiber feedstock demand in Nova Scotia and/or regions within Nova Scotia?
Demand? um, Boy, that's a really interesting question. Is the question demand or is it supply?
Yeah, they're saying demand.
Demand.
So
So if I answer it from a demand perspective, obviously with the closure of Northern Pulp, there was a huge drop in demand, right? And so I'm familiar with the high level numbers. I'll probably do a really poor job answering this person's question because I'm sure there's something specific they're thinking. But when you look at any reasonable calculation of sustainable harvest level in Nova Scotia, it's somewhere between 6 and 7 million, cubic meters per year. Don, you probably know that better than I do, working at Lands and Forestry. With Northern Pulp running, we were consuming, harvesting somewhere between 3 and 4 million cubic meters, a year. And now I suspect, I haven't seen the most recent numbers, but I suspect we'll be, below 3. And so, demand is about 50% of, our sustainable harvest level from what I can see. And this is actually one of the things we try and promote in the bioeconomy is that hey, Nova Scotia is a place with, good access to feedstock, a long history of private land participation and a solid supply chain, which is a really compelling reason to, do a bioeconomy project in Nova Scotia. And you know what? I'm very pleased to say that there's been good receptivity to that. There's been a good recognition of Nova Scotia's history as producers of sustainable forest fiber, and that's really, really helpful to trying to drive the bioeconomy.
excellent. Well, thank you very much, Rod. It's very interesting. We have a bunch of other questions, but we're going to have to cut it off now for time purposes. But we will give those questions to you if you wouldn't mind answering them for the people that have asked them. So thanks very much for that presentation.
Thanks, Don.
Our second presenter is Georg Ernst, an accountant and woodland owner whose presentation is titled Family Woodlot Accounting and Business Concepts. Georg, it's all yours.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, sounds good.
Perfect. All right, let's just bring this up. Okay, and you see the slide deck there?
Yeah, yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. So thanks everybody, and nice to meet you virtually, and thanks for the opportunity to have to present to you this evening. And hopefully I can be as interesting as what Rod was. So, business planning for woodlot owners. So dive right into it. And a mentor of mine, and he was a good businessman and an industrial engineer. And he told me one time, remember 5 P's: proper planning prevents poor performance. So I've often remembered that, and I think that it applies to not just businesses, but everything, but certainly applies to woodlot owners, their business with their woodlots, and executing the treatments and management plans and that sort of thing as they go. So I'm going to focus on 2 things tonight that related to woodlot owners and their business associated with running their woodlot business. And one is cash flow planning, and the next is tax and estate planning. And I'm going to address this at a high level because you can get into very minute details. So we're going to try to keep it at a high level, and just some concepts to think about as you're thinking about your own woodlot and woodlot business. So cash flow planning. So as you can imagine, there's a little bit of math that's involved with that, and it's not a hard concept. We don't need to make it too hard. Oh, sorry, and thanks. So we've got the first poll. Make sure everybody's listening. Is how many planting peas are there? So, okay. So you can answer that while you're listening as well. So cash flow is just I like to think about it as pretty simple. You got three buckets, and they are operating, which is kind of call it your daily or your regular activities. Your financing, which is your debt or how are you going to do what you plan to do, and your investing activities as far as are you buying a new piece of land, or you buying a piece of equipment, or expanding and that sort of thing. So when you think about a concept or a plan, if you think about three buckets and think about these particular buckets, it helps you think about everything and call it the consequences and or the opportunities associated with a particular idea or a plan. And it's just a way of giving yourself a little check to make sure everything makes sense, or that's not going to turn out poorly for you. So look at that. We're batting 100%. Everybody got it right on the 5 Ps. So operating cash flows. So this is pretty simple. This is your day-to-day or your regular activities. So just think about the revenue you bring in, the expenses you go pay out, and the other thing I don't want you to forget about is income taxes, because that, depending on how you're set up and how you're structured, that can have a significant impact on what I call your after-tax cash flows, because you need to repay debt or purchase assets, more or less with after-tax cash flows. So if you don't factor in tax, you could be shooting yourself in the foot down the road. I want to throw in a comment here about operations, and you have one chance to harvest timber, and so you want to make sure you get it right. So spend time looking at your opportunities, meeting with contractors, your buyers, and spend some time making sure you do things, you do your due diligence to make sure you're going to get the optimum value and treatment from your woodlot. So just to want to put a plug in on that related to your operations. And I'm sorry, I skipped over a slide here, I think. Right, the management plan. And planning is obviously in that altogether. So what the management plan does is it gives you the opportunity to predict what your cash flows are going to be related to your property. So if your management plan calls for you to harvest stand A and in year 2 and stand B in year 5, it gives you the opportunity to predict what your cash flows are going to be. And then you also can consider, oh, well, I need to build a road in year 3. So what does that do to impact my plan and my cash flow plan going forward? And there are other benefits to the management plan besides just the forestry related and the cash flow related, and we'll get into those later on related to succession planning. So sorry about that little hiccup there. So our next bucket is financing, and that relates to how are you going to finance your operations and or your investments in property and or equipment. And I'm not a big fan of financing negative operating cash flows with debt. Although having said that, due to the nature of a timber property, you may go some time without having any income from that property. But just make sure you're planning that out carefully, and you can finance those operating deficits, so to speak. You see two logos up there that might be familiar with you and are very accustomed to lending to woodlot owners. One being Farm Credit Canada, and the other I guess call it renewed enthusiasm lately, is the Nova Scotia Timber Loan Board as well, which is a branch of the Fisheries Loan Board and the Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board. And don't forget about the other option that you have is yourself as well. You know, do you have the opportunity to draw on some savings to help finance the purchase of a property or its operations going forward? So investing, so that's the other bucket that we want to think about. So that's more, you know, purchase of property and equipment and sale of property and equipment. Pretty straightforward. So if you look at all those buckets, you come up with this cash flow projection, and don't spend a whole lot of time trying to memorize the math and how you do all this sort of thing. Ultimately, what I want you to think about is that you're going to put something in each one of those buckets, and you're going to take out something from each one of those buckets. And at the end of the year or the end of the period that you're forecasting, and keep in mind we're talking about planning, so planning is forecasting, as opposed to looking back to what you have done retrospectively. We're talking about planning and forecasting. So if you really keep it simple and you think about those three buckets: operating, financing, and investing, at the end of the day, you're putting some in each one of those buckets, and you're taking some out. So you're bringing some cash flow in from revenue. You're spending it out for property taxes or interest expense and income taxes. You've got some money. You might have some money coming in for from yourself, from your savings, or from Farm Credit or Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board, and you've got to repay some debt. And you might buy a piece of property in the third bucket in investing. At the end of the day, if you take each one of those buckets and you empty them out on a pile, that's what you're left with at the end of the year or the period that you're trying to forecast for. So don't worry about that whole long slide. Just think about those three buckets, and you're gonna add to them, take some things out, and then pour them all out at the end of the period, and you've got a pile of cash that's left. Frequency of cash flow planning or forecasting. So depending on your size, but most woodlot owners are going to end up in what I'm going to say is an annual forecasting, and because of your management plans are typically done at a 10-year interval. What I would recommend is that you take and you forecast out what you're going to do over the next 5 years based on your management plan and any other objectives that you have as far as adding to your land base or buying a piece of equipment. And you would do that annually each year and forecast out each 5 years so that you have a sense of where you're going to be 5 years from now. And what that tells you is, oh, well, maybe I can afford to buy that piece of land, and maybe I can't afford to buy that piece of land. If you're a more advanced operator, you might get into monthly cash flows, which is gets you into a little bit more detail. And if you're really active, you might even get into weekly. And if you're into weekly, that means that you're probably not in a fantastic position financially. But if you are in that spot that you need to forecast out weekly, make sure you're doing it, because it is a good exercise and it can point out areas where you run into problems. And if we get into spots like that, we recommend that you're forecasting out 13 weeks. So the neat thing with cash flows is we like to run scenarios and see what happens if we do X, Y, Z, and what happens if we do A, B, C. And you can compare those two scenarios to determine, well, maybe I should do X, Y, Z as opposed to ABC. Or maybe what it says is, I want to do X, Y, Z, and I had intended to do X, Y, Z in year 1, but in reality, I can't afford to do it until year 2 or 3. So you know, you can do these on paper. They're pretty simple, and just maybe you do it multiple times. If anybody's savvy with Excel or other programs, you can do them electronically, and it's very easy to replicate and just change some assumptions. So just think about, don't have one thing set in stone. Just play with it a little bit and say, well, if I do things a little bit differently, maybe I'm better off or worse off. So tax and estate planning. So we'll dive into that again at a very high level, because everybody's situation is different. Yes. So Paul, thank you again. And so what are the 3 cash flow buckets? So, like I say, everybody's situation is different. So we're going to touch at things on a high level. So before you even get into tax and law and all that sort of stuff, at the end of the day, it's no good to do it, to spend a whole bunch of money putting a whole bunch of things in place and find out it doesn't achieve what you want it to do. So most importantly, what are your goals? First, spend your time thinking through what you want to end up happening when you pass away, or if you want to pass something along to somebody, or if you want to sell something, whatever the case may be. Just know what your goals are. Then once you have your goals, then you find out how are you going to get there. So a couple of the how you're going to get there, or what I call tools that are available to woodlot owners, is the one is the intergenerational transfer, and everybody has heard about this, I'm sure, or it's been around for quite a while, and there have been numerous sessions on it. But just high level, you want to make sure you have your management plan, that there's a history of woodlot management. You just can't go out, get your management plan, and then the next day you're eligible for the intergenerational transfer. There has to be a demonstrated history of management on that property, and there needs to be a commercial component as well. So poll results back. So the 3 cash flow buckets are actually 3 B, D, and E. So F was the answer we're looking for, which most people got. So the key takeaway there: don't just go out, get a management plan and assume you qualify. You need to meet a number of other criteria as well. The other tool that might be available to you, depending on the size of your holdings, is incorporation. And there are a number of pros listed there and a few cons, but it boils down to this. Incorporating, there are 2 reasons that you're going to do this. It allows you to accumulate after-tax cash very efficiently compared to doing it personally. And then there's also some legal reasons as well. And it also does help facilitate with transfer of wealth to the next generation. The reality is it's not for everyone, because again, we get into everybody's unique situation. There needs to be scale in order for those tax savings to offset the cost of setting it up, and then you've got annual filing costs as well, because it is its own entity. And it has its own tax return that it needs to get filed every year. It's got its own set of books, et cetera, et cetera. So not necessarily for everybody, but if you've got a sizable land holdings, it very well could be a good tool for you to achieve a number of your objectives. Planning again, spend a little bit of time, and this is not an exercise that most people can do on their own, but it does, with a little bit of help, you can plan for it. Spend a little bit of time estimating what your income tax obligations are going to be to your estate, and then once you've got that estimate done, what are the tools that you have available to minimize that tax, and or how do you plan to pay for that tax? So if we bring that into a real life scenario, what happens if you want to pass along a property to children or nephews or grandchildren or whatever the case may be? That's part of your estate, and there may or may not be tax on that, depending on whether it qualifies for intergenerational transfer and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, if there's a tax bill that needs to get paid from your estate, wood is not liquid in the sense that it still needs to get cut, and you may or may not want to cut it in a way to fund that tax liability. So you may want to have liquid assets around, or plan to have sufficient liquid assets to achieve any objectives related to property transfer. And life insurance is quite commonly used as a way of funding that tax obligation as well. I'm not a lawyer, but another polling question: what is the most important thing in tax and estate planning? So, not a lawyer, but what I do know for sure is wills are extremely crucial, because you get to determine how your estate gets administered. If you don't have a will, you don't get to have any say in it. It becomes a matter of the court. So as you can imagine, it's very important. And it goes back to what are my goals, and your goals get outlined in your will in many cases. So that's why we spend some time figuring out what we want to do. The other key thing to note there is that you want to revisit your will frequently, or if there is a significant change in your life. So I'm going to say every couple of years, I'm going to say every 2 to 5 years you want to be revisiting your will, depending on where you are, or what you've accumulated, or if there's a significant change in your life. So you've come across some additional wealth, something has happened family-wise, or whatever the case may be, but just make sure you don't forget to revisit that on a regular basis, because you want to make sure it reflects what you want. There is going to be some money that's associated with this planning, and professional advice, and I'll be honest, it doesn't come cheap. So it was pretty even split on the poll there. Sorry, just came up. So split between wills and goals, and certainly the will is the way of executing what your goals are. So without a will, it's pretty tough to achieve what your goals are. So pretty good answer on both sides. But it's money well spent, because when you run those scenarios and you do the planning, it's amazing the amount of wealth that can be lost with transfer of wealth between generations if you don't plan for it properly. So you want to make sure you have a good team, and you want to make sure you have a team that specializes in estate planning. And again, it goes back to how complicated your matters are, and the amount of wealth that you have. But keep in mind, there is a fair amount of wealth tied up in properties, woodland properties in many instances, and it's amazing how quickly that can accumulate. So work with somebody you're comfortable with. Get recommendations if you don't have somebody that you deal with now, and go out and find them. And the other thing is, you plan it properly, and it's going to execute very efficiently. So I can't stress that enough. And the key being, you want to have somebody you're comfortable with. So that's a pretty high level of what I wanted to cover. I didn't want to get into too much nitty gritty, and I hope I haven't confused anybody too much, and help provide a little bit of clarity here.
Thank you, George. That's it's complicated stuff. I mean, you're bringing it at a high level and making it sound simple, but yeah, there's a lot to it. And for those of us not involved in this business, it's there's a lot to take in. So thank you for that. We have some questions. Low grade. Okay, these are questions from before. Okay. Still ones from Rods here. Okay. Oh, somebody also asked, would it be possible to have a copy of slides from Mr. Ernst?
Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah.
Thank you for that, George. Okay. Can one change woodland title and ownership to share among beneficiaries before death? What are the advantages and disadvantages? And finally, can the same be said about subdividing a woodland among beneficiaries? Oh, there's a lot there.
Well, that is. So at the end of the day, so I'll back up. If you're eligible for intergenerational transfer, so you meet those criteria, you may be able to transfer it before passing, while you're still alive. However, it still is considered a taxable event. If they didn't qualify, if you don't, it gets reported on a tax return anyway, or let me back up. It's supposed to get reported on a tax return anyway, and gets recognized. So if it is an intergenerational transfer, basically what happens is whatever you paid for that property, it gets transferred to those children. Let's use children as an example, and they assume the cost that you had. So if you paid $1 for it, their cost on that property is now $1. However, if it doesn't qualify for intergenerational transfer, it is a taxable event, and fair market value gets assigned to that, and you would trigger tax on your in your name personally as a result of that. Now, some people say, there are a number of scenarios. Some people say, "Oh, well, I'll transfer it to you. You pay the tax on that property for me, and it's yours." So they certainly get things discounted. So there are a couple things that you need to do there. But basically, when property changes hand, there is a taxable event. Now, you can avoid probate tax by just assigning and owning a name a property jointly. And then there was a question about subdividing, and again, we're getting into weeds, but related to subdividing, there is the risk of HST being triggered as well. Every time, so you're allowed, I believe it's one subdivision, and then after that one subdivision, it becomes taxable for HST as well. So not only could you get dinged with income tax, you could get dinged with HST as well.
Ah, wow. That's new. Here's one that's somewhat related to that. Leslie always has very good questions. How did the trust help to eliminate probate taxes? How would ownership transfer from a parent to their child when they pass on if there is a corporation? How would ownership transfer from a parent to their child when they pass on if there is a corporation incorporated?
So, two things. So let's deal with the first part, or the last part of the question first, as far as the incorporation. So typically, what happens on incorporation, or let's say you own the land in a corporation, and you're going to have shares in that corporation. So what happens is the shares are considered an asset, and in your will, those would get transferred upon your death to that individual. There is, and again, we'll dive into weeds here. There is the opportunity in incorporation with a corporation that you can freeze the value of that corporation as of today, and then the growth of that corporation. So let's use a real life, or kind of the example that you've bought a woodlot, and you bought it and it was cut over. It's now 20 years later. It's all been PCT'd, and there's the bare land value, and then there's value associated with the growth of that timber. You can then say, and let's just for argument's say that it's worth $200 an acre now, and you paid $100 an acre for it. So you can freeze that value at $200 an acre, knowing that it's going to become much more valuable 20 years from now when there's merchantable wood that can be harvested in some form or another. What you can do by creating that freeze at 200, let's just say that it grows to 400 in 20 years time, you can issue common shares to that person that you want to transfer it to, and they've assumed ownership for the spread between the 200 and the 400. So you would only get taxed on the $200 when that gets transferred at your death. So that's probably just everybody's minds are bug-eyed after that, I expect. but so ultimately, what if I boil that down is that there's just corporations owned by an individual. There's two ways. Basically you're transferring shares, and there's an ability to do that as a combination. One as just you transfer the shares to the person on your death, and then the other one is a combination of you can transfer shares upon their death, and you can also give them ownership in the growth of that company while you're living. If I recall, there was a question related to trusts. And probate.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. How did trusts eliminate probate taxes?
Yeah. So the idea with a trust, so what you and we didn't touch on probate taxes in here, and it's more of a the lawyers understand that much better than accountants. However, what can be done, but what happens is on your death, your will gets probated. And there are two things that happen on that. One is that there is a probate tax, and depending on the value of your assets, it can be quite sizable. I can't remember exactly, but it seems to me it's in around a couple percentage points. Don't off the top of my head. So if you've got sizable assets, and again, woodland, if you've got sizable acreages, there's a fair amount of value tied up in your woodland or your woodland properties. So your estate ends up paying tax on the probate. The other thing that happens is that as soon as a will gets probated, it becomes accessible to the public. So Joe Blow down the street can go in to a government entity that looks after the probate. The name escapes me now, but that's fine. And they can find out what you were worth based on what your will's been probated at. Maybe that doesn't bother you, maybe it does. But what you can do is you can hold those assets or transfer those assets into trusts through various mechanisms, and when it's sitting in the trust, the will doesn't get probated, so you avoid paying the probate tax, and you avoid somebody having the ability to look and see what your wealth is worth. So that's again, not a simple answer, but hopefully provide some clarity there.
Yes, thank you. For the last one, George, I'm going to combine two questions because I think this is a real common scenario. The typical woodlot owner who hasn't really delved into this too much and hasn't set up a formal business and isn't sure where to start, and also wondering, well, how do I find a good estate planning specialist that knows about woodlots and is comfortable dealing with woodland? How would you guide or give guidance or help to somebody that's not in that situation?
So what I would, so I just want to make sure I get the question correct. So we're looking at, where do I find somebody to work with as a professional to give some guidance, and then the first step as far as setting up my business for a woodlot or that sort of thing. And I think you end up talking to the same person in many respects, because they're going to be able to guide you based on the value of the property and what you anticipate your cash flows to be. And what I would do before, and maybe you can do it congruently, but I would make sure that you're getting the call it the forestry advice, the forestry management advice, because again, like we say, that kind of starts with the management plan, because that's the one that's going to give you some indication as to A, how much value you have, and B, what you plan to do and predict what you're going to have for cash flows associated with that.
Right.
So then what I would do is I would go to an accountant or a tax accountant. I'm no longer in public practice, but I have biases towards making sure you're dealing with people that you're dealing with a reputable firm. And if you don't have somebody that you deal with already, you can phone and meet with a couple different people to make sure you feel comfortable. Or if you want to take it offline, I can send you who I recommend anyway. And they're going to help you structure your business. Maybe it just means that it only needs to be a sole proprietorship based on your incomes. Maybe based on other sources of income that you have and the income you anticipate off of your woodlot. Maybe the incorporation makes sense. And then you can also get into the estate plan and that sort of thing as well. So the answer is it depends. But deal with. But I would lean towards a reputable firm and a tax. You might not need the tax specialist to be dealing with you all the time, but you would want to have somebody that has access to a tax specialist as well, because they're going to be able to help you with any of the if your matters are complicated, they're going to be able to help your contact person.
Great. Well, thank you for that, George. Are you available for follow-up questions if some of these folks have them after the session's over?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, that's really useful information. It's complicated stuff, and it takes, each time I hear this, I get new bits and pieces out of it, or reminders, and it's really valuable. And so thank you very much for being here tonight and providing this presentation.
Yep. Thank you.
So both Rod and George, on behalf of the we had 75 plus people here participating tonight from all over the place, as well as those that tune in on the recorded version of this. Thanks very much for your time, your effort, your good and useful information. Because of the fact that obviously we're only virtually together tonight, we are unable to present you with a thank you gift personally on behalf of all those that benefited. However, you both will soon be receiving a container of a popular non-timber forest product and a favorite sweet treat of the season, maple syrup, from our friend Pat at Rosebriar Farm at Carroll's Corner. So we'll look forward to getting that to you. Well, folks, that's the end of tonight's agenda and the end of the spring season mini-series. Again, we'd like to thank our presenters, Rod and George, for making this event possible and meaningful to all those who tuned in tonight and to those that will be tuning in to the recorded event at a later time. The full conference mini-series schedule can be found on the nswoods.ca website if you'd like to see that again. Please note, we plan to hold additional webinar sessions in the fall, in October, November, after the busy spring and summer seasons, on a wide variety of topics that we are hearing from you about, as well as ones that we think that you will be interested in. So please look for us in October. We'll be back. As far as the grand prizes go, as mentioned earlier, we'll be holding 2 prize draws for chainsaws on April 30th at 2 p.m. All of you that participated in these events will be eligible for every one of these mini-series events you participated in. You'll have 1 ballot in your name that will go into the barrel for those 2 lucky draws. Maximum 1 win per person. So the more events you have that you've taken in, the better your chances of winning a new steel pro-grade chainsaw. A little plug for my friend Simon. The WOIA nomination deadline has arrived, so if you know of any woodland owners or yourselves that you'd like to nominate for the WOIA, I should say Woodland Owner of the Year award that we celebrate every year with a wonderful field day for kids, the public, and it's just a wonderful thing to be involved in. And I know a number of you have gone and enjoyed it. So please send those nominations in right away, please. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, please provide your feedback in the exit survey before you leave. This will help us plan for future conference events like this. To do this, before you close down your browser, click on Leave Event to get to the exit survey, which only takes 1 or 2 minutes to complete. Your information will be kept private and not used for any promotional or commercial purposes. Now, if for some reason you're not able to complete the exit survey, simply go to the nswoods.ca website and email the request to have the exit survey emailed to you, and we will do that. Toot sweet. So that's it for now, everyone. We hope that this was a worthwhile use of your time and that you learned lots. We look forward to our next session in the fall, and we hope to connect with you then. We hope you have a happy and healthy summer. Thanks, and take care of each other. Bye for now.